Hello, everyone. Welcome to Responding from the Gap, Part 2, Signal versus Story, Episode 5. And by this point, we've talked about signals, stories, conditioning, reinforcement, protective automation, and observing the process without suppressing it. But none of that matters if it doesn't change how you're actually going to respond. Because the goal of this is not just to bring awareness. The goal is to actually create enough space that we can respond differently in real time. Because for most of my life, the reaction just felt completely automatic. There was a feeling, there was a story, and before I knew it, I was acting from the pattern. I'm defending, avoiding, people pleasing, shutting down, seeking reassurance. The process happens so quickly, it just feels inevitable. But once I began recognizing the signals and catching that loop in real time, that's when I was able to change things. And I discovered there's a small space between the activation and the reaction, not a huge space, maybe only just a second, sometimes less, but it's enough. It's enough for you to notice. It's enough for you to say, pattern activated, systems running. And in the moment, you don't have to obey the story. You can let the feeling exist. You can observe the pattern, and you can recognize the urge. Then you can choose what to do next. And you can sit with that feeling, and it will dissipate. That's another thing that I noticed, that the less that you try to resist something, and the more you just give it an acknowledgement to just be, like, oh, that's sadness, I see you, it'll go away. Or, oh, I have this racing heart. I'm going to concentrate on this racing heart and put my awareness into it. And it'll start to alleviate when it is something that's associated with a mental process. And you can choose what happens next. It's not going to be perfect, and it's not going to be every time. It took me years to get to where I was able to interrupt it enough, but it got quicker once I realized that the signal was happening before the story. Once I realized the emergent properties that humans are. And I definitely started to notice real change in my life. I started to be able to handle situations with emotionally draining people, narcissistic personalities, exes that I have a lot of. I was able to go through the drama and to navigate it. I was able to navigate my children better. I'm still working on this. This is still an everyday thing, but for the next part of the series, we will talk about ways to actually respond from the gap. Once you find the gap, you're going to notice that a lot of your suffering gets alleviated just actually finding the gap. It's not where all your suffering disappears, not where all of it disappears. It's more so where your possibility appears, right? And I know I've offered up a lot of cautions. I want to offer up one more caution though, and that's to don't turn awareness itself into another story. So don't believe that just because you understand the framework today, that you're going to understand it perfectly forever. And don't believe that just because you caught a pattern once, you're going to catch every pattern every time. That's not been my experience in real life. That's not been my experience. The process unfolds slowly over the years. And at first I was only noticing patterns after I would already react, like I said. Then I started catching the reaction itself while I was in the middle of it. Like I was upset about having a bad day and all these little social stressors and all these things I had going on and financial stressors. And then I caught myself taking it out on my partner. And I remember in that moment when I was upset, wanting to say the things I was saying to him, I was not even mad at him. It was me. It was the environment. It was the thoughts. It was the process. So I started to see the pattern when it was actually happening, when I was in the middle of it and going, whoa, wait a minute. Why am I doing this? And then eventually I started noticing the thoughts forming in real time, and the signals that were forming the thoughts were the last thing to actually arrive. And even now I still miss things. The patterns still activate, the stories still form, and old conditioning still appears. But it's helpful because one of the unexpected realizations that came from realizing how we are emergent systems is just how temporary everything is. Everything is constantly in fluctuation and changing, and how you react to a certain situation might not be how you would react to it, in an hour in a different environment, or everything is always constantly changing. My hormones, my bio, gut ecosystem that we talked about, everything is constantly in fluctuation and changing. And that was a side effect of understanding the emergency process that really helped me to understand that even the stories that we tell change. And the very fact that the pattern can be observed, interrupt, and retrained is evidence that it's never been fixed. The difference is that as you go through this, your awareness will return more quickly. Your growth is not going to be a straight line. It took years of repetition for me to get to where I was, and it's going to take years of repetition to fully integrate where I want to be. But once you truly understand how human beings are these emergent systems, it takes away the need for blame, for shame, for rumination. You will visit the same themes many times. I have healing is definitely like a cyclone, is how I feel. And every time that I revisit this pattern, it's like, okay, now I'm on a higher level. I'm on a higher vantage point and I can handle it better. I'm up here now. And the one thing that I kept backsliding on would be the shame and the rumination of when I would have a bad day, and like falling back into that, oh man, I did so good for so long, but nope, here I am again. That conditioning of associating an identity of myself to something, and as being this emergent system that's always changing, it's a lot easier for me. I can't blame the signal, the pattern that was there to protect me, and it's difficult to blame something so far in the past when I'm constantly changing, when my environment is different, and I have this better vantage point. So you do begin resetting more quickly. You have more emotional bandwidth. That's a big one. I work third shift, and I always thought that I was just exhausted because of the shift that I was on. But once I started using this technique and using the framework, I found that I was no longer exhausted, even though my sleep didn't change at all. You don't really understand how much energy you use on your emotional bandwidth. So that's a good thing that comes from it. And so even though the spiral repeats, your relationship to it does change. And that's why I believe the framework works. Not because it's going to remove suffering forever, but because it can change the way that you relate to suffering, change the story that you tell yourself. And when you change how you relate to reality itself will begin to feel different.